Hello, welcome back to the Harmony Inspired Health podcast. Today's episode, it's actually a deeply personal episode, and I'm joined by someone I've known since our university days in nursing, someone whose strength, vulnerability, and resilience have always inspired me, but never more so than now. Eslana is a mother, a nurse, a podcast host, and soon to be author of the book Resilience After Great Loss: Learning to Live and Grieve Simultaneously. Her story is raw and real. She tragically lost her 15-year-old daughter to suicide, an experience that would shatter anyone. And yet, through her pain, she has become a voice of truth and light. So in today's conversation, I want to talk about what it really means to live and grieve at the same time, the mindset practices that help build resilience, and how a daily gratitude ritual can act as an insurance policy for life. This is going to be a powerful episode, one that will touch your heart and remind you of the strength that lives within us all. So welcome to the podcast, Eslana.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so honored to have you on the podcast and just to share your story. Like I said, you truly are an inspiration, and I am really looking forward to getting into this conversation because I know that it is going to help so many other people out there who have gone through a lot of grief and a lot of loss. And so I'm so excited that you're writing your book about this and you've started your own podcast and everything. So yeah, thank you for sharing everything with the world as you are, and just for being here and being willing to share such a vulnerable part of your story. So for those who don't know you yet, can you share a little bit about your background and the journey that brought you to writing your first book?
Yeah, of course. I grew up on the Gold Coast. I grew up in poverty, abuse, and neglect. I became a mum at the age of 20 and I've had 4 children. I also worked very hard to become a nurse and then a midwife, but I had a lot of people who would meet me, hear me talk about my childhood, my past, and say things like, you should write a book. And I would think, the younger version of me would think, who wants to read a book about childhood sexual abuse and all of this trauma? But that's not what they were talking about. They were talking about who I was in spite of all of this, and that I hadn't I hadn't become the sum of my origins. I wasn't, defined by where I had come from or what I had been through. And so I had heard that a lot over the years. And then fast forward to 2020, 2015, I started teaching antenatal workshops. I teach workshops to help people prepare for labour and birth in a way that sees them avoid unnecessary birth trauma, because the key to avoiding birth trauma has less to do with the environmental factors of how birth plays out, more to do with how interactive you are with the journey. So you take ownership and don't give your power away. And that was my superpower. So I'd been teaching workshops. I had a son at the age of 20 and then 3 daughters to my now husband. But I in 2022, I very suddenly and unexpectedly lost my teenage daughter Riley to suicide. There was no warning. We didn't know she was being groomed by her 21-year-old lesbian supervisor who had Riley convinced that she was bi. Throughout their childhood, I had regular check-ins with the girls about their sexuality and trying to normalize, do you think you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Riley would just smile and say, just a boyfriend, mum. And she never wavered on that until she had met this person, which she was keeping from us. And anyway, on the back end of the grooming, she had come out to her friend group as bi, and her ex-best friend was using Snapchat, which Riley wasn't allowed, to bully her and say things like, no wonder you want to kill yourself. You should just fucking do it. There's no place in the world for people like you. And so, as I said, without warning, she jumped off my balcony 33 stories in the air with me and her sister's home, and I had to go down and find her. I was screaming so loud that night that the girls heard me from 33 stories and they came down. They were 11 and 13 at the time. And so the last 2.5 years of our life have been spent doing an exceptional job of walking back through the flames of grief and trauma every day to be able to rebuild ourselves. You find yourself in the rubble of a life you no longer recognize and feeling like an alien on a planet that you no longer speak the native tongue of, and you don't know. People would say, one day at a time, but in this kind of grief and trauma, it's not. It's 1 minute at a time. Just getting through 1 minute feels like such a chore, and so it makes getting through one day feel insurvivable. But I'm very proud to say that I had the courage to do just that and to put the shattered pieces of my broken heart back together in a way that A, I didn't believe was possible to start off with, but B, resembles nothing like what my life or what I was before, but that I'm so proud of. And in the aftermath of that and learning to live and grieve simultaneously and seeing how, like you said, the daily practice of gratitude has served to be something that we always did before. And the way that I had always approached mindset and even taught about it and then implemented the teachings meant that I'd set myself up unknowingly with this insurance policy that facilitated a resilience necessary to be able to navigate this journey, and in doing so, learn to live and grieve simultaneously. And that's what I'm doing. So the book that I'm writing is very much about how I've done that, because people would on repeat from the early days, men, women, when they'd hear the story, they would say almost the same wording. How are you surviving this? I couldn't, I wouldn't. And you hear that enough times, you start to question, what am I doing? What am I like? I know it's not special. What am I doing that has people believe that they're not capable of it? And I understand that prior to this kind of grief and trauma, we truly can't even comprehend it. It's not even, you can't get your head around it. And so, of course, we can't comprehend the capacity or potential that we all have within us to be able to not just survive, but learn how to thrive in the aftermath. So I was evaluating that, and I pride myself on not being a victim in life. I've been through too much shit. I am not the victim. I'm not giving my power away in an attempt to villainize anybody. And that was something I was proud of. But I went to that place. I think it was probably about a year after she died, and maybe it was coming up to the anniversary, but I went to that place. I was like, what the fuck? Like, why? Why did I have to go through all this bad shit in my life? I really thought life was going to start being kinder to me. Kai and I were going through a divorce. We were trying to be best friends. I really thought in my 40s, I was in a unit I was a cat lady. I was a 40-year-old cat lady, and I was okay. And I thought life is going to start being kind. This is the part of my life. And so I went to that poor me, why me place of like, are you for real? Like, I feel like I've spent my whole life bracing for impact or getting back up from the last injury, assault, or insult. And it was in that moment that I realized that had I not been through everything that I had, because my tendency from a young age was gratitude, what had happened was it had born this resilience born of gratitude that I didn't know I had as a default setting in my mindset, my perceptions, and my approach to life. That was the thing that would keep my head above water when I was convinced I would drown. And when we were younger and we had no food, if you just fed me, I'm so grateful. Simple acts of kindness I saw as like unconditional love that gave me hope in mankind. And so there was so much gratitude, and that became, after practicing it so regularly, it became something I wasn't even aware I was doing. And I'm not saying that the kind of resilience born of gratitude necessitates the trauma, or abuses that I've been through. I'm saying that if we bring an awareness to how powerful practicing gratitude is, we all can experience that kind of resilience. And that can be the life raft for essentially the inevitable challenges that life are going to bring. Because I truly believe that our contractual agreement with this life that our soul makes is that we get to be here and love and have passion and adventure and all that life has to offer. But the flip side of that coin or agreement is that we will experience grief and loss at the absence of the things that we loved and held dear and the people. So
Mm.
life is going to come for us, and hopefully nothing like how it has for me. But that's the other trap that I found people fell into, is the trap of comparison. Is they'd bring something up and then they go, oh my God, it doesn't compare to what you've been through. And I feel like, and I talk about it in my book, comparison is the thief of joy, because when we put our suffering next to each other in an attempt to compare, and in doing so, I lower mine to put it beneath yours because I don't want to, and it comes from a good place, I don't want to insult you or come across as offensive because I don't want to be seen to be minimizing yours. What we do is we invalidate our suffering. And it's by acknowledging our emotions, our state of being, our lived experience, our suffering, and allowing it to be. but then it becomes a choice whether or not we stay in those darker places. And that's the difference between being a victim. But the acknowledgement of our suffering and validation of it is the doorway through which we actually facilitate more joy in our life, because it's not a trade-off. Like our culture and society kind of subconsciously tells us that, oh, well, if you're grieving or you're suffering or you've been through this horrific stuff, you must be sad forever. You must be just completely destroyed. And don't get me wrong, grief never leaves. There's a sadness that stays with me, but it's also a choice how long I sit with that. And gratitude is the string that when you grab it, you will never find the end. Like, I'm so grateful to have been Riley's mom. I'm so grateful for all the things she brought to my life and everything she taught me. And I am the person I am today because of the love I experienced in being her mom and being able to love her and be loved by her. And then if I start going down that rabbit hole of gratitude, you can't, there's no end. And my awareness for that came up because when I was hitting that poor me whammy, I remember even in the days after her death, we were sitting with the lady planning her celebration of life. And I had said, I'm so grateful to have been her mum. I believe that our children are on loan to us to help prepare for the world. And had I known she was only on loan to me for 15 years, I wouldn't have done anything differently. And when I was reflecting on all those conversations, I kept saying, I'm so grateful when I found her body, she looked peaceful, laying face down with her hands up around her head, like that she wasn't a mess. And even my friend said in the week after, like, if you're talking about things you're grateful for after what you've just been through, I think you're going to be okay. And she couldn't have been more right, because whatever we choose to feed and water will facilitate the release of hormones that create the feelings that we then experience. It's not chicken and the egg shit. I didn't feel sad and then think sad things and listen to sad songs. I didn't choose the thought, maybe, but I fed and watered it. And then I probably played sad songs, and now I'm releasing hormones that make me feel depressed. So if we find ourselves in a place we don't want to be in our internal existence, it can be as simple as flipping it on its head and starting to think about all the things I'm grateful for, to have the very opposite effect on my physiology. So
Mm.
yeah.
Wow, mic drop bombshell right there. Like everything. I mean,
I know when I start,
I'm like, I've got all the emotions going. I'm trying to fight back the tears, even though I've heard your story, we've spoken about it and all of that heart to heart, but trying to fight back the tears, trying to like really absorb all the wisdom that you just shared, and also just being in so much awe of you, of like how much of a pure heart you have. Like it's such a rare quality, unfortunately, to come across like people with such a beautiful heart. And I cannot wait to read your words, because if you write anything like you speak, then it's just gonna be like a beautiful, beautiful book. And yeah, wow, it's just yeah, you definitely touching people's heart, and I'm really grateful for you to be sharing all of this, because it's so important. And I am one of those people that would have said to you, or said like, I can't imagine, like I couldn't survive this. I don't know how you've survived this. And I don't know how to word this, but do you think, is there a way that your childhood traumas, and this isn't going to come out articulate and it's not going to come out very nice, but it's just the way that it's forming in my head, is like, do you think your childhood traumas primed you for this sort of event in a way that sort of primed you with that resilience building?
I wondered about that, but I don't want to ever imply that, like, I never want somebody's heart or soul to assume that that's what's necessary or that that's the key, because I truly believe that if we, instead of thinking, oh, but you've already been through all that, so you were in survival mode. Yeah, 100%. Like, 100% I was. I spent my whole life in fight or flight. I don't suggest or recommend it. It's not nice. Now at 43, I am existing in this peaceful nervous system where my heart rate isn't double or triple when I address conflict or advocate for my boundaries. And this is an unfamiliar territory that I'm falling in love with. It's amazing. But I would encourage people to have less of a perception that that is the obviously, yes, I believe that there's an element of being a survivor who chooses gratitude and resilience that makes you maybe more resilient. But what I want to drive home is the message that this gratitude can be used like an insurance policy. We insure our cars. If we own a car, we insure it, right? Not because we expect there to be damage, but because we're aware that by owning the vehicle, we are at risk of financial outlay, whether it's in my driveway and hail damages it, whether somebody else hits it parked on the street, or just by owning it. I don't even have to drive it. It still could cost me, you know? And then the more we do drive it, the more we know that we may likely need to, so we insure it. And we may insure it and pay that premium and resent that premium every month for the rest of our life and never have to make a claim. Because let's be real, it's not likely that we'll have an accident or anything, it's just possible. But what is then, if we flip that over to our lived experience, the reality is it is likely we're going to, it's almost guaranteed we're going to experience some form of loss, and that it's probably going to bring with it some trauma. And maybe there's an element of me having been through stuff that made me more ready for like impact, but that's not a nice way to live. And I would advocate for people to have a much nicer life and prepare like we do for our vehicles, than think, oh, well, you've been through shit, so you're going to be better at this. Probably not. And if you think that because you've been through a heap of nasty shit, you're going to be able to navigate what's coming, maybe not. What if it's the straw that breaks the camel's back? Because the difference isn't exposure. The difference is our mindset. It's the way that we perceive our life. And if we do acknowledge that, okay, if I say my contractual agreement with this life is that I will get this, but I will have to face this. Let's be real. If you have amazing parents and you love them and you enjoy them, you're going to face the inevitable loss of them, because we're not supposed to outlive our children. Our parents are supposed to leave at some point. And I'm watching people who are our age who are navigating the loss of their elderly parents, that they had warning and they knew, and their parents lived a full life, and the grief is overwhelming because they didn't anticipate that they would be hit this hard with having to face the second half of their life without that beautiful parent, you know? And I think if we get trapped into kind of either, I denied it. I thought that by staying on the right side of the healthcare system and helping people through trauma, illness, loss, like on a subconscious level, I really thought that being in nursing and midwifery, we were going to stay on the safe side of the line. And I helped people. And I was in resources and held hands with people who lost their parents and their children and their babies. And I supported people through birth, knowing their baby was going to be dead when it came. And I thought somehow I was going to, and isn't that our ego? I was going to get through this life okay. I thought that because life had been so unkind to me and people couldn't be trusted, keep them away. I spent most of my life as a young adult keeping everyone at arm's distance or further, because I thought if you let people close to you, they're going to hurt you. So don't let anyone close to you. But all that does is robs you of the joy that comes with living and human connection and all of these beautiful people that I was missing out on in my life. And they say it takes a village to raise a child. It definitely takes a village to survive the loss of one. And I know that because after all that I had done in my career and how I had worked and helped and impacted all these people's lives, this sense of community came to the forefront of people that I had impacted, strangers we'd never met, people we knew, those close to us and who weren't close. And that sense of community was what held our heads above water. And so I believe that the two most important things that we can have in life is control of accountability and responsibility for our mindset, and therefore the way we perceive our lived experience, and meeting our basic human need for connection. Because when we don't keep people at distance, I think the one big thing that grief has shown me and trauma is we're all just suffering. Everyone you see, that person who cut you off, the person you think is rude, who didn't smile, the person who's laughing the loudest and seems like the happiest person, I've been all of those people, is carrying something you will often not understand or know. And so if it's a safe assumption that everybody's just suffering, imagine how far simple acts of kindness can go. Being the kind person, even when that person hasn't. I'm not talking about tolerating rubbish. You can be kind and then it can be met with not kind. And I'm like, here's my boundary. But I just think that when we bring it back to being aware that, okay, if my lived experience will include loss, even the foreseeable, my parents say, or whatever it is, but then there's a much greater chance that there will also be other significant unforeseen losses, but that are kind of predictable, not in the nature of how they occur, but in the statistical likelihood of being a human, right? Because the more people we love, the more people we let near us, the more we have statistically the risk of being exposed to somebody who's in an accident, or who I heard about a lady in Bali who's in essentially the middle of her life, and she wasn't even on a scooter. She got hit by one and now she's not here. Like that impacts everybody who knew her, close and further away, because it reminds us of our mortality, And so I think that instead of having that kind of focus, if we go, okay, I don't know how it's going to look, but I know that in some way I'm going to experience loss. It's the flip side of the coin. What can I do? And we can create an insurance policy that helps it's not going to remove the inevitable storms of life. It's not going to stop us from having to face them. It's going to facilitate us doing so in a way that's kinder and softer to my heart and my soul, and reminds me of my capacity that I didn't know. So you're not supposed to be able to imagine it, because it is unimaginable. And for us, there was no warning. She wasn't struggling with her mental health, had a diagnosis, and we knew that this was likely. And so, it's being able to give it the same weight, because I'd pay my insurance on my car. I might resent it, but I pay it. And
So, what
yeah.
does it mean to you then to live and grieve simultaneously? Like, how can we?
I remember the first time I found myself laughing after Riley, and the immediate oppressive and overwhelming guilt at that was horrific. Like, it was like something whispered in my ear, you don't get to do that anymore. You don't. How dare you? And it's funny because I think we don't mean to do it, but I think we facilitate the expectation that if you're in unimaginable grief and trauma and loss that isn't going to go away, and you have to navigate all that is life, every birthday of the girls, every milestone, every what would have been hers, it's horrific, right? Then that has to be that we can't comprehend it, so it has to destroy you. And if it doesn't destroy you, I now can't comprehend that. And because the girls and I have done so much more than we have the time constraints to discuss, to be able to be in this part of our life where when people ask me, how are the girls? It's almost like it would be more culturally acceptable if I said, oh, they're fucked. They're destroyed. They're not okay. Their mental health is stuffed. And when I go, they're amazing. And if you met them today, you wouldn't know what they'd been through. And I don't mean in a denial type of way. I mean in the resilience they have and the capacity they have to love the fuck out of their life and just really be living. And that's been a conscious part of around the 1 year anniversary, I sat down with them and I said, I want the next year to be the year of who is Mia, who is Ali. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't want your childhood defined by the death of your sister. I don't want you to become the lower girls or the girls whose sister took their life. And I want to go on this adventure with you of working out who you are, what you like, who you want to be, what you don't like, all these things that are such important things to explore that often in trauma get forgotten about. And I know from my childhood, because I had a severely disabled sister, everything became about, will we go there? Can Katrina go there? Can the wheelchair go there? When we get there, we'll be when Katrina's ready. And because of her high needs, we got pushed to the side. And as a young adult coming through life experiences where people ask me simple questions like, what do you want to do? Or what do you like? Or what do you think? I hadn't been asked that growing up. It wasn't up for consideration. And so I really struggled with my own identity, but the capacity I had to answer simple questions. And it was confronting, and it made my trauma hurt me more, because I realized as a young adult what I'd actually missed out on in being nurtured and tended to. And so I think that the reality is we 100% can live and grieve simultaneously. Grief doesn't go away, but our mindset, the lens through which we view our lived experience, our life, and everything that happens in and around it will be the predicting determinant of how satisfied and how much we are able to enjoy our life, not what happens in our life. And I know we had this conversation, and you were the one that got me thinking when you asked me after we'd spoken about Riley's death and everything, how would you describe, what do you think happiness is? And I said that I don't believe happiness is a state of being, because especially as a female, but men are no different, as hormonal creatures that are constantly impacted, not just by our internal environment of our hormones and our stresses and all of the effects of that, but our external environment, my state of being is ever changing. So if I perceive happiness to be a state of being, then I'm going to live my life constantly feeling frustrated and as though I'm failing in an attempt to achieve happiness. I believe that happiness is a perception of my life in spite of my ever changing state of being. And when I choose to view it that way, I'm the happiest I've ever been. And on paper, that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it doesn't really need to, because I'm not putting it on paper, I'm living it. I love where I live. I pinch myself at that. Like, the younger version of me from Housing Commission is living on a beautiful over 4,000 square meter property in Tallapudgera, listening to birds every day, and it's rain on the tin roof and 5 minutes from the best beach in Australia. I think at Burleigh, like, I have all of this beauty and joy in my life. And it's not about my possessions or what I have. It's about the way that my capacity to view my life as happy in spite of my ever changing state of being. And that means, because grief is a bitch, it never leaves, but it just sneaks up on you and reminds you that it never leaves. And it will revisit you suddenly without warning and make you very aware of its presence. And so I can still be in that. I can be in the darker days that grief, visits me with such intensity, but still know that I'm happy. Still know that I have this life where I would describe it as joy filled, and so therefore the darker days don't take over. And it's the ability to know that you can hold grief and sadness in one hand and joy and happiness and contentment and fulfillment and adventure in the other. And that we all have the capacity to learn how to let both of those things reside within us in the same parts of our heart and soul. Do grief and sadness exist, that does happiness and joy, and that neither one negates the presence of the other. Because I'm happy and I'm having a nice day and I'm laughing doesn't mean I'm not living with grief or still experiencing sadness. And if I'm sad, it doesn't mean I'm not happy. They can live simultaneously. They don't negate the presence of each other, but they actually exist because of each other. Of course I'm sad because I loved her. I would have laid my life. You can't love someone so intensely that you would lay your life down for them and then walk into a future tainted and stained by their absence, unaffected by that. You can't.
Absolutely. And it's just us, like, it's our human nature to experience both. And I think if you're always in the pursuit of happiness, you end up letting yourself down, because it's like, not to be dark, but the possible, like, being happy 24/7,
It's not possible.
it's not possible. Like, we live in duality. We came
So
into
much
this
pressure
duality.
too.
So
Yeah.
much pressure. And I know one of my friends, like, she's been through some loss as well, and she talks more about, like, happiness to her is just contentment. And that really sort of resonated with me. From, like, the Ayurvedic perspective, we talk about the notion of santosha, which is like just being content, and that is the
Peace.
peace, exactly, that inner peace. So being content if something shitty's happening, like, not, like you said, put in boundaries, don't take shit. But if there's something out of your control that's happened, then being content with that being part of your life story. And you don't have to accept that that's the finality of it, or whatnot. You can always improve and better yourself. But also the thought of having to constantly chase being 100% happy all the time, it's not human.
But
And so I think,
sometimes too, the thing that we not isn't ideal, we can change our experience of and relationship to by evaluating my mindset, my perception. How am I
yeah,
viewing this thing? Because if I'm viewing it from a way that feeds discontent, or like I have a negative view of it, is there a way to reposition myself or a new lens to view it through? That means, and I talk about this as in, like, to give weight to our perception. If we don't have to always agree on the way that we view life, and that's okay. But if we were all sitting in a room in a circle with a child sitting cross-legged on the floor, and you're standing there arguing with me that you see the child's face, therefore I must see the child's face. But depending on where I'm positioned would dictate what I view. And if I'm seeing the back of their head, we're going to have conflict and this almost resentment of, no, I don't see it the way you see it. And the reality is, if I want to change the way I view any part of my life or what happens in or around it, I have to have the courage to get up out of my seat and reposition myself. That's all. Most people won't do that. Most people don't take accountability for the fact that how they're viewing things is a subconscious process that is from conditioning way back as far as their childhood, and it's an outdated way of viewing things. And that if we wanted to take responsibility for our discontent or discomfort, sometimes it's just acknowledging this is outdated, it doesn't serve me, I'm going to get up out of my seat. And I actually have the potential to reposition myself over and over again and view it from every different angle, and then choose the way I want to view that. And obviously, when I reposition myself, I see why and how you're seeing it the way you're seeing it. And it may
Mm,
not be the position I ultimately end up choosing, but I do have the capacity to reframe things. And if I sat just viewing and putting all of my energy on the groomer or the bully, or that Riley isn't here, or all the things I'm going to have to navigate without her, it perpetuates my suffering. And I have the ability to choose the way I view her presence in my life. If I focus on her absence, it's sad. It's awful. It's unfair. But if I focus instead on her presence and what I believe she came here to teach and to give me, because I was convinced I wasn't having girls. I was My dad's a pedophile and my mum's a nut job. She did not prepare me for life. I did not want the responsibility of girls. And so my ego said, the 6 kids that I want to have are all going to have penises. Like, how egotistical is that to think that we can dictate it without gender selection? And so when there was no penis on Riley's ultrasound, I cried for a month. I was like, what am I going to do with girls? I can't do this. And then I had 3 girls. And the lesson early on that I would tell everybody is, if we got everything we thought we wanted in life, we would miss out on so much. And each one of them softened me more and more and showed me a love I never would have known if it wasn't for being their mum. And I truly believe that because Riley was so much like me in features, in behavior, her heart, the way you described my heart before, it is sad, but it's also beautiful. But that she had that. And I wrote her a love letter the week before she died saying exactly that. I talk about it in an upcoming podcast about Riley and the butterflies. But when you have greatness in you, the world can feel like a really pressured place to be. And until you find your purpose, be so careful who and where you choose to shine your light on. And I didn't know what was happening, but I knew something wasn't right. And I had no idea how much she needed to hear that. And I can relate to how big and raw my heart is. And I don't have the capacity for it to be different. I've tried to be less in life. I've spent most of my life feeling like a square peg being shoved into a round hole and apologizing for how much I am. I'm sorry, I know I'm too much. And I'm so grateful to be here in 2025 where the world is chaotic and a mess, but it's also such a mess that who gives a fuck if I'm alive? Really, out of all the shit going on out there, you're welcome. Because I have a big heart, no malicious intent, and a really powerful message. So for one of the first times in my life, I'm stepping into the power of that. And yes, it breaks my heart that Riley had all of that, and this world was so unkind that she felt she couldn't stay here. But I think that, yeah, it's such a privilege to have been her mum, and I truly believe that the love she came to be, to show, and to facilitate ripping me open, that I could look at her as a small child and process my own grief, that how could you not love and protect this, so that I could do the work to become this version of myself. 100% she was so meant to be here. And who am I and my ego to dictate the term that she would have been here? And the beauty is, by living consciously and really being present, I got to navigate grief going, even if I had known she was only on loan to me for 15 years, I wouldn't have done anything differently. I loved her with every fiber of my being, and she knew that. And even the night before she died, we had that conversation, teary and hugging each other and saying how much we loved each other. And to be able to navigate because we're not going to see it coming, grief and the absence, free from guilt and regret, because I'm not also layering that on by going, oh, I was unkind, or the last thing I said was, nasty, or I yelled at her. Everything came from a place of love. And there's so much value in being really present with anyone and everyone that you care about, and making sure that every interaction is so genuine and so love based, because you never know when it's going to be the last.
Eslana, you talk about gratitude being like an insurance policy. I think for everyone listening, we would love to know what your gratitude practice looks like. And for those who are listening and have had deep traumatic loss and are grieving, and they just can't pull themselves out of that sort of feeling sad and that deep, deep pain, where would you say they start? How do they start to, you know,
I think there's two parts to that. I think the pulling yourself out starts with the acknowledgement that I'm not responsible for every thought that pops into my mind, and you're not, but you are
Mm,
responsible for what you do with them. And we don't realize we're doing it. So, whilst I was navigating at the beginning of May, Riley's should be 18th birthday, there was no shortage of thoughts of like, what I was missing out on, how much more I was going to miss out on, that we would have taken her, gone clubbing, like all of these things. And so the thoughts are popping into my mind. But if I feed and water all those thoughts, it turns into anger and resentment, which is really anger usually coats sadness, let's be real. And it feeds, or like if I fed and water and ruminate on those, all of what I'm missing out on, I am going to release, or I'm probably more likely, I wanted to listen to sad songs. I wanted to feel that because that's our instinct. When we feel hurt or betrayed, or, we've been broken up with, it's instinct. We want to listen to the sad songs and do all of that because we're so wired for that, that it takes a consciousness, a conscious, and courageous accountability to go, whoa, I can do that, but what's the price I'm going to pay? Because what's going to happen is I'm going to release hormones and chemicals that send signals to my body to create the feeling of that. So if I'm feeling depressed and sad, don't get me wrong, if you can't pull yourself out of there, I 100% encourage you to go get some professional help, counseling, potentially a doctor. There is always people who can't balance their hormones and they need chemical help. And I'm never trying to present as if I navigated this journey without all of those helps. I've had a really incredible widespread support network with everything from counseling to doctors and more natural side of things and pharmaceuticals for me. I think it's the awareness that if I find, and if I'm not used to doing this, if I find myself feeling the way that doesn't serve me, I can reverse engineer. What have I done to get here? Because we've done something, we've contributed. We didn't just lay still and suddenly feel sad. We fed and watered something. We probably, and our behaviors were then affected by what we were thinking. Because if I think I'm sad and I listen to sad songs, I'm more likely to stay in bed. I'm not going to go to the gym, which then releases feel good hormones. So it's reverse engineering and being accountable for what we did to help facilitate that, because it's not going to go away. She's not going to not have died. Whatever your trauma or your sadness, and it's 100% valid, but it's not going to change. So the things that can change are the lens through which we view it. So if I want to flip it on its head, all I have to do is think about the things I'm grateful for. Because like I said to you, once I pull that string, you'll never find the end. I challenge you to do it. You start thinking about things in your life, the people, everything that you're grateful for. It's a string that just keeps going. You can't actually get to the end and be like, I'm all done. There's nothing left to be grateful for in life, because there's always something. The fact that the sun is shining, the fact that in winter I've got a t-shirt on, not a jumper, like where we live, there's no shortage. And so it's being aware of and accountable for that. And what was the second question?
just
No,
before
daily
we go on
practice.
to the second question, do you think though there is a place for people to allow themselves to feel like crap, to feel sad, to
100%,
feel
100%. And I think when we say as a culture and society, I just be careful there though, because I've always told my girls it's really important that you acknowledge your emotions, whatever it is, allow them to be, experience them, really validate them if they're valid. But then it becomes a choice whether or not you stay in that place. And even my 16-year-old's going through a breakup at the moment, and we held space for her and we did things and we took time off work, and she said yes to the gym, and I was so proud of her, all these things, but she was just constantly just tears. And after a number of days and allowing her the sadness and encouraging her to validate and experience it, I said, get in the shower, have a good cry. I don't care if you have to scream. I don't care how it needs to look, but let it out, darling, because when we hold it in and we don't validate and acknowledge and experience it, then it becomes a problem and the body keeps the score. It won't just go away. But after a few days, I was like, okay, darling, like now it's time for me to do the boot camp side of things and say, you have to kick your own ass, because now it's a choice whether or not you stay there. You're choosing sadness. And I'm by no means saying she's not still sad, but I was saying, don't let it fuck up your life. Don't miss work. Don't, do all of these things. It doesn't mean the sadness goes away. It means I acknowledge it. I put it on the shelf when I'm in the shower later and have a good cry, but I'm going to keep just keep swimming. It's making the right choices. And that's why I was so proud of her that she did say yes to the gym. And that allowed her to connect with people who make up a good portion of our support network. And me being open, her heart's broken. She's going through her first breakup. So then they would band around her and give her the gifts of like a hug that doesn't require words, And when you create that human connection, then you have people in your life that notice the subtle differences on the days you're not okay. And they don't need to fill the silence with unnecessary words. They just reinforce their loving presence by maybe hugging you. And that's the other thing. When you hold someone for at least 20 seconds, their brain can't help but release oxytocin, the love hormone. That is what makes us feel so amazing after an orgasm. It's what makes us convinced we're in love with a one-night stand. It's that powerful. No, you're not. It's just drugs from your brain. But it's also the hormone that's present when we birth a baby that would make us lay down our life for them. And so it's facilitating connection and letting people hug me and making sure they know sometimes I need to be hugged a bit longer. But our culture and society is trying to say it's okay to not be okay. And I know we say that, but is it? Because there are days, and I'm fortunate to have a good support network that understand when they're like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm not okay. That it is okay. Because there's a big difference between me going, today sucks a bag of dicks, I am not okay, to me going, I'm genuinely not okay, I need to go get some help. And I think that because people don't know how to handle so much of what we're talking about, when I say I'm not okay, they feel the need to fill that silence with, have you thought about a counselor? Have you gone and got some help? Do you think you should see a doctor? And it's like, man, I'm just saying that life is dark today. And I might even be standing in the corner of life, the dark corner, holding onto that doorknob through which most people in that situation take their life. But I have the emotional intelligence and the awareness that I can choose my perception, that I can sit in this darkness. Sometimes I need to allow it. Sometimes it's not me allowing it. I don't have a choice. Sometimes it's that today's a fucking dark day and that's okay. Of course it's okay. I witnessed my daughter's death essentially. Like I knelt in broken glass at her side without shoes on my knees to hold her hand, her lifeless body before the police pulled me away. Of course I'm going to have dark days. And of course around her 18th birthday, things like that. So it's allowing and validating and stepping outside of your experience and going, if this was someone else, how much compassion and empathy would I have? But how much would I also be able to help them understand maybe this is going on a bit too long. Maybe you do now need some help, So there's a difference between going, today just sucks and I'm not okay. And I think we could do better to facilitate allowing that without needing to fix it for people.
I did want to end on your gratitude practice, but another question has come up that I would love for you to speak on because I think is such an important one. And I've heard from, people who have lost people in their lives have said, like, the nurse said this, or my auntie said this, and they shouldn't have said this. And being on the other side as the person who's trying to give comfort and you just don't know what to say, like, there's always that, what's the right
Think
to
I
say? How
think
do you?
because we're so used to having to fill a silence, we can't even stand with someone without going, weather's nice today, isn't it? We don't know how to sit in silence. And so I think that because of that, particularly in this situation, people feel like they have to find words for it. And there just aren't words. And that has to be okay. There just are no words. And so I found that because people didn't know what to say, they'd either withdraw, and so then they would feel guilt and shame of not feeling capable of supporting or so nervous to say the wrong thing, which I understand. All of this comes from a well intentioned place. We're not doing it out of malicious intent. But sometimes when we feel the need to fill the silence or fill the gap with words, they feel harmful. And when people would hear about all of this in the early days, so many people would say, oh my, because I'm good at articulating stuff. Oh my God, you should speak in schools about bullying. And I would be fucking screaming on the inside going, are you kidding me? How am like what? I've spent most of my career with Queensland Health. Bullying doesn't change. It doesn't go away. That is learned behavior. Their bodies get bigger. They stay bullies. You're never going to eradicate bullying For one, I think instead of focusing on stopping bullying, not that efforts shouldn't be made, but we should be better preparing our children to handle themselves, to own their shit and be authentically them in a way that allows them to be that in every room they walk into, instead of being so grossly impacted by the negative behaviors of others. And I think if we focused on ourself, our mental health and our well-being, and did better for ourselves and helped each other do that rather than focusing on the negative behavior. But it was, I would be there going, are you kidding me? Like, the last thing I want to do is go and try and deal with the assholes in the world, because they're not going to stop. And what are you going to do? Talk to kids that are learning how to be assholes from the parents in their house, probably? Like, and it was so this internal thing. And I wasn't angry at the person for saying it. I was just so exhausted at the fact that my body had to keep taking another breath and another breath. And I didn't know how I was going to survive. And I was feeling like I couldn't even take a deep enough breath because my shattered pieces of my broken heart were going to pierce my lungs. So I've got all of this going on, and people felt like they needed to say something. And I know they were trying to honor the way that I show up, but it was, the better thing to say is there just are no words, and to have hugged me, or I know I did a post at one point and said thank you to everybody who's been well intentioned, and things, but also thank you to the people who would see me in Coles when I'd be have to food shop, and I swear I look like an 80-year-old homeless man who was just trying to get through. But I'd said thank you to the people who would see me and not approach me, and just tilt their head to the side and smile with a gentle, like, acknowledgement, because I did not need to cry in the fucking sauce aisle. Like, I didn't need to be a mess in Coles, and I was so appreciative of that. So I think, to answer your question, there are no words, and that has to be okay. And that's what I now say to people. There just are no words, darling. I'm so sorry for your loss. Because 100% you can say sorry for your loss. It's never going to be offensive, but don't distance yourself because you're scared to say the wrong thing. Just say I have no words, but I'm here for you. Than if there is anything that I can do. But sometimes we need to preempt the things. Don't make it that person's responsibility to know that they need to feed their children or do whatever it is. Like, start the food train, deliver frozen stuff, like whatever it is, it's taking the initiative to assume that if this person was bleeding out because their leg had been cut off, you wouldn't be like, what are you feeding your kids for dinner? You'd be like, we got the kids sorted, you tend to the bleeding, And so we just need to deal with our mental health a bit better, like we would if it was a physical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. Like, a lot of mental health that's not always seen, whereas physical trauma we give a lot of attention to because it's you can almost feel that person's pain because you can see the pain. But mental
100%.
health
And that's
is a silent
that's why
battle.
I'm so passionate about speaking so openly. And there's no way you could have worded any questions wrong. It's funny, we go, oh, we're triggered. Triggered just equals offense. I'm not going to be offended. There's nothing to be offended at. This is my life story. I'm very open about it. And I think that it serves to facilitate the realization that we are all having a shared experience. And that by being open and willing to talk to anybody about any aspect of my suffering or my life experience and everything that's happened in and around my life means that they're more likely to feel seen, heard, valued, and stay in this life and know that they can take their hand off that doorknob through which they feel the only out of their pain is to exit this life, because we don't do enough of it to be, and it's when we suffer in silence and we think we're isolated in our experience and we think that I'm the only one this is happening to. And so many people, so many counselors in the early days said, grief doesn't get smaller, you just get bigger and grow around it. And there was these narratives that I was like, fuck you, I don't want to hear it. You don't understand. And then but I kept showing up. I kept doing the whatever it was, the workshop, the counseling, everything. But I remember just feeling so angry at hearing these same things over and over again. And now I'm down the track. I'm like, turns out it doesn't get smaller, you just get bigger and grow out of it. So yes, they weren't wrong. It was just a lot to listen to in the early days. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think where we could be doing better to, something I didn't know before we lost Riley was that 9 people in this country every day take their life. And that's a horrific statistic, and most of them are men. And we could be doing better across the board for ourselves and each other. And that starts with connection and facilitating that. And we create connection by being open, honest, and vulnerable about our lived experience, because it doesn't matter what your grief and loss looks like. If you've lost a pet that you lived out a portion of your life with, and that was the truest form of unconditional love, and it's rocked you, and you don't feel like anyone would understand that, and you don't want to put it next to my grief because 100% I want to validate that person's experience. I want to help them see that that is 100% valid, and 100% their grief needs to be acknowledged, but also that they have the same capacity for joy and happiness as they learn to live and grieve simultaneously.
And yeah, like I said, I'd love to wrap this up with your gratitude practice. What are you doing? What have you done to see the light in every day and to fill your heart with gratitude?
Something I didn't realize that we had done all the time, and I noticed it more in the aftermath, was that whenever the kids were separated from us, it could just be a day at school, they went for a sleepover, anything, when they'd get in the car, we'd be like, what was the best part of your day? Or what was the best part of your sleepover? And what happens when you go on your brain goes on a fact finding mission to collate all of the good things, and it piles up all the good, and then it has to pick a winner. And sometimes they're like, this was the best part. It was a standout. Other times they're like, and they're thinking because there's so many good things and they have to pick a winner, and they'd say what it was, and we'd be able to celebrate and unpack that. And then I'd say what was the worst part. And again, sometimes they'd say something straight away, but not very often, because the reality is when your brain's just gone about collecting all of this evidence of how amazing your lived experience is, then it's kind of like when I teach the workshops, when you are owning your journey and you're doing all this and one negative thing pops up, you're like, bitch, please, I'm not going to get down in the dumps over this one thing. Have you seen all the shit I'm getting right? And so they've got this big pile. So sometimes they're like, nothing really. And so, because it makes them realize there really wasn't any shitty part to my day. I'm having a good lived experience. But if they said, the tuck shop ran out of my favorite drink, I didn't get the watermelon flavored water or whatever it was, I would be able to go, that's a pretty good life. If the worst part of your day is that you didn't get the favorite drink, but then if they said such and such was unkind, I would be able to unpack with them, do you think that there was anything you did that contributed to that behavior? And if they think so, but most of the time it's not. Let's be real. People bullying and being unkind is more to do with them than it is to do with you. And that's what I would help them understand. You would see their body lighten, like, and this isn't about me. And so being able to know the difference between, did I contribute? Do I need to be accountable? And this actually is not mine to hold on to, would relieve their nervous system. So this was just a practice of ours. We didn't even really, we'd done it so much that we'd be like, what was the best part? What was the worst part? And so they would ask us when we would go and do something or go on a date. And so I truly believe that when you condition your brain to look for the positives, to acknowledge the negatives, but in a way to evaluate the weight of them, do they really need to bog me down in life? Or is this just a reinforcement that my life is pretty good? And so when we were navigating the immediate loss, we were inseparable. The girls did not want to be away from us. I never goes away for work, but that night he was in Sydney, so he had been woken to a call where I intended to say something's wrong with Riley, but all he heard was Mia say, "Mum, she's gone," and me scream, "What do you mean she's gone? What do you mean she was on the balcony?" So we have our own traumas, and he couldn't even book a flight, see his phone, so he ended up 6 hours outside Sydney Airport, not realizing it was closed, crying in the dark alone, waiting. So we had this separation anxiety that saw us just bond to each other. But as I became consciously invested in them not being codependent and wanting to step away from us, we had that bit of distance and experiences and life without each other. And what happened was we were coming back together from a place of instinct, going, what was the best part? And so I truly believe that that kind of approach to life helps facilitate a subconscious resource where you do it without realizing it, even if there's not someone to discuss it with.
Beautiful. Love that so much. And yeah, thank you once again for just sharing all of your heartfelt wisdom. It's always so beautiful to connect with you. It's, when you just find those people that are just so real, so raw, there's just that proper connection. And I love, your honesty and openness and willing just to share to help other people, as much as it might be helping yourself through the process. I'm not sure that's like your journey, but I know that it's helping other people. And for you to be willing to share your life like this is just so beautiful. So where can people find you? Where can they get your book and listen to your podcast?
So I'm heading to Bali next week to finish writing my book. So that is coming. My podcast is called Why Mindset Matters, and it's on every platform. Apple, Spotify, it's on all of them. YouTube, everywhere. I think there's about 20 platforms, so I think you'd have a hard time not finding Why Mindset Matters. Or they can follow me on Instagram at Resilience Mindset Coach. Yeah,
Mm.
I feel like I should have probably started with a trigger warning, explicit language. I don't know if your podcast normally has that.
I'll go put one in.
Yeah, sorry. It's not sorry.
And Eslana's beautiful, I'm going to call it a beautiful story because it really truly is a
Yeah,
beautiful story. It's so
100%.
hard. And it is also, I've been able to share in my book because I did ask Eslana, like her view, like she shared in this podcast, and what happiness is after loss. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I love the metaphor that you shared with me when I asked you that about my book, you know, about shifting your perspective. If there is a child sitting in the center of a circle, like you can always get up and shift your perspective. And I think that is such an important skill to have. It really is a skill because a lot of people just won't do that, won't master that, won't even attempt to get up and look at things from a different perspective. So for those of you who are listening, I'd encourage you just to see where in your life you can be looking at something from a different perspective. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. I know Eslana's story is such a testament to the human spirit. She's raw, honest, and deeply moving. And she reminds us that, you know, grief and gratitude, they can coexist, that even amidst pain, there's space for love, joy, and hope. And so if you did find this conversation as soul stirring as I did, I encourage you to follow Eslana's journey, tune into her podcast, and keep an eye out for her upcoming book because that is going to be a fantastic read and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. And just remember that you're not alone on your healing journey. You can hold grief and growth in the same heart. So until next time, keep rising into your higher self.